Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 14 of Guerilla Social Work Podcast. This episode of the podcast, as always, is brought to you by Alpha Counseling and Treatment, who is the largest and most respected provider for justice-involved clients in need of sexual offense-specific treatment services. Alpha is also a JRI certified agency in providing moral recognition therapy and substance use disorder treatment to justice-involved clients. You can be confident that the treatment you will receive with Alpha will keep you out of the criminal justice system. Alpha clinical professionals are trained and certified in cognitive behavioral interventions for sexual offending. This evidence-based program teaches participants strategies for avoiding sexual offending and related behaviors. The program places heavy emphasis on skill-building activities to assist with cognitive, social, emotional, and coping skills development. Visit their website today at Utah's Best Therapy, or you can call them directly at 801-645-5455. Also brought to you by, who is also our guest today, Triple S. Triple S provides scientific outcome measures for clinicians in the field of behavioral health. Outcome measures provide direction for both clients and treatment providers using evidence-based practice. Any program not using outcome measures to track their clients' progress and success has been scientifically proven to be less effective. So on that note, our episode today, we have two very bright, educated gentlemen who are going to come on the show and actually give us a little bit of a background about what everything I just said, what that actually means. So Mr. Zach and Mr. Tomas will be on the show. Enjoy.
Saying it wrong this whole 2 minutes that I learned the word.
Oh, did you guys ever watch the first Saved by the Bell where they were like in junior high?
Oh yeah,
awful.
Miss Bliss.
No,
Dude, they weren't.
Asian, it'd be Miss
They
Bliss.
weren't good until Jesse came around. Like it was when it was Jesse, Screech, Kelly, Lisa, Zach, and AC Slater. Which AC Slater was my hero, bro.
He was a little cutie.
college years. That was the problem.
If you could mix AC Slater and Zach, what was his last name in
Morris.
the show?
Zach
Morris, yeah. Zach Morris and AC Slater, like mix those two. I'm like, yep, that's what I want to be when I grow up.
Okay.
Yeah.
You pulled it off. You pulled it off.
Yeah. Except I don't have that curly haired mullet and look like an asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yet growing it out.
You are a jock that thinks he's good looking, so I mean,
I never claimed to be good looking once.
I know, but you think it.
Well, I'll have
he
to
should.
think it. It's just,
He should.
Are we recording yet?
Yes.
Oh, we are?
Oh, I got that.
Yeah.
Should we just like hand this back and forth just in case?
Just sit right in the middle so your faces are always right together.
Yeah.
That's the best, I
Oh,
think.
yeah. And then
We've
kiss.
got guests.
Kind of romantic.
I guess handing it off might be easier.
Yeah. No, that's good. And who's handing that off, Jeff? Who are our guests tonight?
So, Zach is the guest that currently has a mic. Say hi.
Hello, everyone.
And,
That's very polite.
yeah, introduce that gentleman sitting to the right of you.
Yes, this is Thomas. He's smart.
Hello.
That's right. No, dude.
There
Smart.
you go. That's a wrap.
Smart doesn't do you guys justice. I'm because like when I think about, I mean, Zach, when he starts talking about stats and stuff, which I know some people listen to that and I think they get erections when they listen to like you talk about stats. I mean, I can see a stats class. When you're teaching a stats class, any of those co-ed girls, you're like, dude, your Cohen's D is.
Your Cohen's D.
This is not
Cohen's
recording
D is
right
awesome.
Slinging the Cohen.
now. Justin, that's not recording, is it?
It probably is.
Your Cohen's D is great. Can you teach it to me after class? Can I get an extra tutoring?
Oh
session
my gosh!
about
Please
that?
tell me this is just testing.
It's testing.
Yeah, it's so testing.
Oh yeah, we're doing the demo video.
Okay,
right now.
good.
The demo D.
Yeah, that's
We're
right.
just making a mixtape.
We're making a mixtape. I was talking to Zach earlier about are you more of a Marvel guy or a DC guy?
Marvel.
Oh, dude, good for you.
Yeah.
What about you?
I gotta go Marvel.
That's right,
Yeah.
Thomas. Make the right choice, dude.
From DC.
No way,
Well,
bro.
look, Batman is pretty awesome, but
No, okay.
I mean-
Batman, I'll give it to you, is really cool.
Yeah.
But let me ask you this though: why do you like Batman? Do you like Batman because of Michael Keaton and Christian Bale, or do you like don't say Adam West because I know that's not true.
my answer is dumb. But if you want the reality, the cartoon Batman is the one that got me into it.
Oh, that Batman! Oh, that one. And I heard a rumor that they drew all that on black paper too. Like, and that's why it was always
yeah?
dark. That was the shit, bro.
Right.
And then they came out. Did you guys ever see Batman? It was like The Dark Knight Returns. It was a cartoon, and The Dark Knight Returns 2. How can you be a DC fan? You never seen this, Thomas? Dude, if you watch it, you will.
I never even
love
heard of it, but yeah.
Why do you like DC better than Marvel?
It's darker than Marvel.
Darker, like is in like
In general.
pornographic or
Maybe I should.
well,
like
define
that.
dark. There's a lot of paths to dark.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems more, I don't know. It's original. Everything Marvel that's good
Yeah.
took it from DC. DC
Really?
came up with it first.
Oh no, dude, Zach's head's gonna explode here.
Well, that is just
Everything,
rich.
it's true. It's
Hold on-
true.
hold
There's
on
a
now.
I
parallel
don't
to
know
every
if we're
character.
venturing into territory we can back out
Okay,
of.
so Zach's wearing a
Go
hold
with
on.
it.
I'll just fully
is-
disclose.
I'll go with it.
Well, I know nothing about DC and Marvel. I know, but who did Spider-Man originate from then in DC?
That's Marvel. Well, all right. Spider-Man's not taken, I guess.
Are you saying that Iron Man was after Batman?
No. No,
I've never heard him say Iron
I don't get into all of this. There's a parallel for all of them. So if you go back to the early days, DC came out with like the Justice League.
Sure, yeah.
2 years later, Marvel came out with the Avengers.
Oh, okay, all right.
And then there's parallel characters that they come up with to match. And so you can go back to DC. They came up with a lot of these guys first. Marvel took them and made them their own.
Yeah, but what about like Superman? Who's his counterpart in Marvel? Because that guy's a bitch, dude.
Superman?
Stupid man.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Because I know you're going to, like, the fact of what you're about to say is why he's a bitch. Like, because he's, how can you make a character that's like unstoppable? Like, so you can shoot me with bullets and I don't die. I'm super strong and I can shoot laser beams out of my eyes. Oh, by the way, I can fly. I've got every power on every power and I'm indestructible. Like, that's a dumb character, bro.
Your argument sucks.
What do you mean? That's just a dumb character. I'm invulnerable. Like, what?
Well, that doesn't make Superman a bitch. Maybe his inventors or whatever it is, but Superman himself, if that dude existed, that's as legit as it gets.
Dude, wasn't there another?
It might not be fair, but
No, well, they
you can say Superman's a bitch. How can you say Superman's a bitch?
because eventually they saw their wrongdoing, and they're like, you know what, dude, we can't do this because this is such a dumb character. And then they invented kryptonite. I was like, oh, so there's this one thing that's gonna kill you. Like, oh, okay,
But look how weak he is when it happens. You know what I mean? Like,
starts crying.
If you even get near him with kryptonite, he shrivels away. Maybe he is a bitch. You're right.
Yeah,
that
dude,
rock
he's-
breaks him. You're right. Never mind.
Yeah.
I retract my statement.
Would you be a bitch to be able to fly though? I think I would.
Well, yeah.
Like if
for
you
sure.
if you could
But
fly,
I
you had to
already
be a
am.
bitch.
I can't do any of those
Wait,
things.
so what were you
Yeah,
gonna
no.
say, Zach? You pulled the microphone towards you to pull it up, and you guys are pulling up some type of stats on Superman right now.
Oh, apparently the equal to Superman. See, I know Gladiator, Hyperion, Sentry, and Blue Marvel, but
What?
exactly what they
Those
just
are all from X-Men, though, aren't they?
yes.
Yeah. I read all the X-Men.
See,
comics when I was
okay,
younger.
1990s
I know a lot
X-Men.
about X-Men. I know a lot about X-Men.
The
the
only
best.
reason I like the Punisher is just because of the 2004 movie. With
Oh,
Thomas
that was
Jane.
great. Thomas Jane.
That's the only reason I
with
like
John
Bang up
Travolta.
job.
Yeah,
of,
where he looks kind
He
of
played.
plastic surgery ish.
Yeah, that was-
but Thomas Jane. That was awesome.
That was really underrated.
Yeah, I got like 1 star.
thought it was
Way better than that.
Did you guys see the Dolph Lundgren one? Because that one's
Oh yeah.
much better.
Dude, Dolph.
Well, he was in the best Rocky of all time.
By far.
And then, yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Probably one of the coolest fighting film bad guys ever.
Yeah. No, that's
Well, yeah, he says 2 words. Or what, what's he,
Well,
like
that
one
sells-
line.
Like what if
he dies, he
Ivan
dies.
Drago had these big
I must
long
break you.
monologues that would have completely killed the character? He
Yeah,
had to be this
how
kinda
long is he in that
silent,
movie? And he has 2 lines. I
I
think.
must break you.
I love they take their shirts off. They just like bodybuilders. Like,
Immediately sweating to
yeah, well, of course. Yeah, that's pretty funny stuff.
I like the message that movie sends, though, that the Russian guy is all roided up, but Rocky's this natural guy who was Sylvester Stallone that was roided to the gills. It's all natural.
Yeah, Stallone was not clean during that.
You know what's
Why
funny
should he
about
be,
that,
though?
though? You know what's funny about that, though, is like that came full circle when that movie Icarus came out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
I just started watching
Yeah,
it.
and then the Russians were all juicing, like every single one of them in the Sochi Olympics. They had to like every single medal. was
Literally
tainted.
everyone?
Yeah, that's pretty. And it was like state sponsored. Like Putin's like, yeah, give it to him. Give him the good stuff. You
Well,
know?
yeah, then the one dude escaped.
Yeah.
The guy that outed him.
Yeah, he's in protective custody right now.
it's pretty
So
wild.
Yeah, I don't know how we got on superheroes, dude. That was
Rocky
you.
4.
No.
Zach,
No.
Yeah.
bringing in all your.
No. He just eyed my shirt.
He's selling
see
steroids
him?
on KSL.
You took us in that direction. Yeah.
You dissed DC. That's
Well, I'm
Did
not.
we even finish introducing Zach and
I
Tomas?
don't think we did.
kinda
Let's
said
just
his-
revisit that. Let's
I mean,
start
yeah,
that over.
Zach is a therapist and a statistician.
Statistician.
Way too many
He's a tongue twister.
syllables there. Statistician.
Yeah.
Statistician.
God damn it.
Jesus.
Statistician.
Okay.
Zach, what's your job?
Bullshit.
What do you do? Are you a statistician or a statistician?
Let's start over and have Zach
So let me-
introduce himself.
it's not. I got that skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So Zach Bullock is a statistician. Okay.
Is that how you say it?
Statistician.
And one of the,
A statistician.
and Thomas Miller.
Superstitious.
Zach.
Or what are you, Thomas?
Statistician.
It's not what you've been saying.
Other than
Statistician?
you're an engineer of some sort, a social engineer.
Man, this sucks.
Zach,
Right?
speak up and
I'm
say
all
what you
kinds
do.
of engineer.
Right.
No,
What do you do?
I'm an audio engineer.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess Zach pulled me on as a research assistant
There we
at
go.
one point and taught me a little bit, and I just kind of took off with it.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, so Zach, Thomas, myself, and Jeff are all co-owners of Triple S, which is we're registered as a clinical research and development. Entity, agency, company. Is that a better word for it?
Great.
Yeah, that's way better than you introducing. You can't even say a word.
Like statistician,
Yeah,
you mean?
okay.
That
You
said
still are
statistician.
stumbling over?
Moving on.
Yeah.
So there was some comments that we were reading, and we got some feedback on this podcast. And so one of the things we heard was about that Jeff and myself and Justin, we don't do a great job on breaking down some of the things that we talk about. So in a previous podcast, we had referenced like risk factors, and for those of you listening who have no work in this field, I mean, I assume you know what those are, but clearly you don't. So we're going to talk a little bit about those today, because I mean, you have really no reason to know what those are. So I'll do my best here on this. So if any of you guys work with actually the term risk factor. And you guys can jump in wherever you want here. I believe it started it comes from the insurance industry. So this idea of actuarial risk assessment. The reason why, like a 25-year-old male, if you are a 25-year-old male listening to this, why you have to pay more for your insurance than a 25-year-old female is because statistically, 25-year-old males are more likely to get into car accidents than females. So you might argue with that and say, well, I'm a good driver. I'm not going to get into a wreck, but the insurance company is like saying you're a male bitch and you are going to look at the scoreboard. Stats would bear out that you're wrong. And so they basically, it's not the one thing to keep in mind about that. It's not predicting that you're going to. So same thing with our offenders. It works exactly the same way. It's not predicting that now you're going to get into a wreck. It's simply saying that males who are 25 years old or maybe who drive a sports car or something like that are statistically at a higher probability for getting into a car
They're
accident.
statistically idiots.
Yeah.
In the will.
And they shouldn't be buying sports cars when they're that old. I'm just saying. Yeah. So does it make sense? Am I doing justice so far? Now, when the real smart stuff, Zach's going to start talking, and you're going to have to break those things down. Because when you rattle off stats, I'm kind of there. I'm like 75 there.
That's why I have Thomas here.
That's good. Again, Thomas speaking like people language?
Yes.
Not genius language?
He can interpret for me.
Right. Because when he was presenting, we were presenting to somebody the other day. And
Oh
we were
my
talking
gosh,
about
dude,
this.
let it go.
Then he made eye contact with him, and they were in the zone, and all the rest of us, and they didn't notice it, but the rest of the crew, the rest of the entire presentation, we're all looking at each other like, what the fuck? No, I'm kidding. Yeah. No, Zach did a great job. Zach always does a really good job.
He's not.
Well, I'm not kidding a little bit. So with
there's a doctor there. What did you want?
So with criminogenic risk factors, so anytime you're working with justice-involved clients, one of the things that they try to do is make sure that whatever you're targeting in treatment is something that is actually going to reduce the risk for a person to either violate the terms of their probation or parole or to reoffend in a criminal way. And so they've done a lot of research on that and started to study, okay, well, what are the factors that contribute to these? And so I was trained in a model for just criminogenic stuff for anybody who's committed a general criminal offense, not sex offenders. And they cite pretty common ones, which are, what's your criminal history look like? We all know that you're much more likely to, the history says you're much more likely to do something if you've done in the past. Where you live, what your family is like, who your friends are, what you do in your free time, whether or not you have a substance abuse history, what your attitudes are towards the system. Do you have emotional management skills? Now, with sex offenders, those apply. But there's also some additional ones, and it's a little bit more specialized because the reason why a person would commit a sexual offense is much different than a person who commits a general criminal offense, and so they've developed some specialized tools for that. And Jeff, do you want to talk about the differences between so there's two different types of risk that we target, and we target static risk versus dynamic risk. You want to
of course
articulate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so static risk implies it's risk that is unchanging. It's sort of already happened, and that there's not much you can do about it. So, for instance, number of charged victims, number of past criminal offenses, gender of victim. For whatever reason, when our clients sexually offend on a male, it elevates their level of risk to do it again, as opposed to if they'd offended on a female. So those are examples of static risk factors. Again, it helps predict risk, because again, one of the greatest predictors of future behavior is past behavior. And dynamic risk, though, is really where we as clinicians or therapists shine, in that we can actually do something about it. Dynamic risk implies risk that can be changed or modified. And we currently use a risk assessment instrument. The acronym is SOTIPS. That stands for Sex Offender Treatment Intervention Progress Scale. It's a mouthful. And there's 16 different dynamic risk factors. I'll
Can you rattle them off?
I can rattle them off. Yeah.
Without looking at them?
Of course.
I'm testing.
Right, check this out.
So, sexual offense responsibility. You want me to define each one too?
Yeah, we can talk about those individually a little bit. Sure.
Sex offense responsibility. So that is what it sounds like, the degree to which you're willing to acknowledge that what you did was on your shoulders, not putting blame on anybody else, et cetera. That, again, each one we could probably delve into a whole podcast in and of itself.
How about you read it, and then I'll define it exactly. So the one thing is I just want to reference, we're referencing a dynamic risk assessment that was developed by Robert McGrath, Georgia Cumming, and Michael Lasher. This was the most updated version was October 2013. So this was not something that we invented. We use it because it's been studied pretty well. We like the numbers on it, and that's the reason why we use. It's not like we came up with that. Just want to be clear on that. So
do a quick synopsis for me then on sexual offense responsibility.
So the sexual offense responsibility concerns the degree to which the individual believes that his sexual offending behavior is the result of his personal decisions and behavior, as opposed to external causes. The individual does not need to admit to all of the sexual offending behaviors for which he was convicted in order to score well on this item. We referenced this earlier in another podcast because, again, one thing is that we talked about denial not being a researched factor. Now, it's included here again, and we talked about that too because it's still probably a good idea. This is actually a big part of why we developed the Triple S outcome measure, which Zach's going to talk about here in a minute. But we're not trying to say that taking responsibility is important. I mean, clearly. So if anybody's listening to this and they've disagreed with the fact that we say, well, denial isn't really supported by the research. It isn't supported by the research, but everyone acknowledges that it's probably a good idea you talk about that. How we get there is a little bit different. So what's next, Jeff?
Sexual behavior.
Sexual behavior item concerns the degree to which the individual engages in appropriate versus offense-supportive sexual behavior. And appropriate is partners of legal age, consenting partners, non-coercive sex, non-sex offense-related fetishes, and offense-reported or offense-supportive would be children, coercive sex, other illegal sexual activity, and offense-related fetishes.
Good. Sexual attitudes is next.
Sexual attitude item evaluates the degree to which the individual recognizes and self-corrects his attitudes and thoughts that support or condone sexual offending. So some examples of this would be like emphasizing sexual conquest as a source of identity, overvaluing sex as a way to make himself happy, viewing himself as sexually entitled, viewing women with hostility, viewing others as objects for his sexual pleasure. So some of it, believing that children can make up their own minds about having sex, or having sex with children isn't harmful.
An important side note on sexual attitudes is, so whatever we score the client on sexual behaviors, their score on sexual attitudes needs to be at least as high as their score on sexual behaviors, because the idea is that attitude or behaviors are a reflection of attitude. So it's those two kind of go hand in hand. And there's another one coming up here in a minute that has the same scoring criteria. But after sexual attitudes is sexual interests.
And sexual interests is items that evaluate the types of partner and behavior that the individual finds sexually arousing. So this would be, again, partners of legal age, consenting partners, non-coercive sex, non-offense related sexual. Those are appropriate sexual interests, and offense related with children, coercive sex, other illegal sexual activity, so on and so forth.
Sexual risk management is the last of our sexual specific risk factors.
Yeah, and the sexual risk management, that item is the degree to which the individual identifies his sex offending pattern and is following a realistic and effective plan to decrease his sexual offending. So does he manage emotional states? Is he using drugs and alcohol? Is there any preoccupation with media focused on, the target age and gender of the offense related? Is he making comments that are supportive of sexual offending? Stuff like that. So a minute ago, Jeff had mentioned that that was the end of the sex related objects or items that we score on this. And what's important about that is there's 11. So we have 16 risk factors total. And in fact, the other 11 risk factors that we score, they don't. They actually say don't take the sex offense into account. And I think if you're listening to this either as an offender or a therapist or the general public, the idea there's 11 other areas of their life that actually matter more than those 5 to determining whether or not they're going to sexually offend again. And there's 2 really big ones that make a huge difference, and you guys can kind of see some of these. So a big one that we tend to focus on, and this is, again, part of the reason why Zach and Tomas are here, because one, and I guess, I don't know, you guys can maybe pick me up here, is I would say not all risk factors are made equal. In other words, not everyone is as important as the other. So, for example, the 2 that I think are critical, if I have a safe place to live and I have a good job, if I got a good gig that I like and a safe place to live, man, I don't know. I feel like you're 85% there.
I agree with that. And it's a game changer, or it can completely sink a client when those 2 things are not there. Those are some of the last, the last 2 safer social influences on this list of things. But the way that SOTIPS is scored, it doesn't have us really put a value of one risk factor being more important than another, but it sure as hell seems like it with employment and residence.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about using the statistics, because we can start to see what types of things are influencing other types of things. And so it's none of it's mutually exclusive. So one thing in one risk factor is going to influence something else in a different risk factor. And then we can start to see patterns emerge and to see which ones are are influencing more things.
Okay.
And then we can start to focus in on that and say, this one is something that we should really dive into for this individual.
Right. So you're saying that, just so everybody's clear on here, that again, if we're saying, and that's, I'm pulling that number out of thin air. I'm saying that and this is anecdotal, I feel like if my client has a good job and a good place to live, I've just seen more success with that. And what you're saying there is that there are some risk factors that certainly for that individual have much more meaning and should be targeted more frequently and more aggressively in therapy. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. It's kind of fascinating how you came up with that. Like there was it's based on a theory, is it not? And then you kind of applied it to what's going on with the SSS outcome measure.
Yeah. So, using inferential statistics, we can look at influencers, which types of behaviors or ways of thinking are influencing other types of behaviors or ways of thinking. We can start to look at things going on in people's lives. How do they treat other people? All sorts of things like this. And so then we can see, well, if A is influencing B, then we can start to look at, well, what's influencing A? And we can go down the list and find, W's influencing A, which influences B.
Right.
And then if we see the W's also influencing B, then we can say, well, let's try to work on W because it influences both A and B.
So in other words, if I'm a budding therapist, especially in the field of sex offender treatment, it's easy to fall into a trap of, I need to address their lack of accountability. Like this person's categorically denying their sexual offense, and by God, they have to take accountability. Like we can't take another step in treatment until they take accountability. Like that is super common for people that are trained in this field. And it's unfortunate because I feel like if you're doing that, I can't really blame you. That's been decades of how this has been done.
Well, we want everybody to be accountable for their actions.
Correct.
So that's an obvious goal that we should have.
But you're saying there's another way to get there.
Absolutely, because if somebody's resistant to that type of treatment, then we obviously need to focus somewhere else. And if we find statistically that something else is influencing that, something else is going to help them become more accountable, then we can focus on that. They won't even know that what our goal is.
Right.
So just to kind of illustrate this for a listener, maybe as a therapist, maybe I really do want my client to take responsibility for his offense, and I just keep running into a wall there and I'm not getting any traction. The stuff that you and Zach have kind of figured out using statistics says that I'm 100% asking you to make this up off the top of your head. I'm not expecting you to remember everything that you've researched, but give an example of a type of risk factor that could be seemingly unrelated to sex offense responsibility, but through the voodoo stuff that you guys do could help.
Yeah. So, man, and trying to think, because that was something we found. I apologize we don't have it in front of us, but
yeah, I put you on the spot. So
no, it's just great. So
no one's going to hold over your head, dude.
So sex offense responsibility is the outcome. So we're saying that was maybe a risk factor that this client scored high on. In regards to what Thomas is saying, that would be A, and that's what we're trying to focus on. What this would essentially do, and again, and let me try to explain it this way. Do you guys have a favorite sports team?
Dallas Cowboys.
Do you know the players pretty well?
Yeah.
Okay. Who would you say on that team has the biggest impact on the outcome of that game?
Zeke Elliott. Pretty obvious when he got suspended. Dallas' season went to shit.
Okay. However, going with that same line of logic, is it theoretically, is it okay to say that everyone on the Dallas Cowboy team is a significant player?
Wait. Well,
they're a pro, right?
Yeah. Everyone there has value. Everyone there plays a role. Zeke is the one that stands out.
Okay. So I'm going to now interpret what you just said through stats.
Okay.
And then go back to what Thomas is explaining.
Awesome.
So theoretically, everyone on the Dallas Cowboys is a significant football player, or they wouldn't have made a professional football team.
I follow that. Yeah.
But your player, what's his name again?
Zeke Elliott. What we have found is, although all the players are significant,
that doesn't mean every player is important for that game. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe they were picked, maybe they did this. But along those same lines, let's say Zeke is the outcome. We're trying to figure out, okay, Zeke, when we have him in, we have greater odds of winning that game. You take Zeke out, what happens?
Greater odds of losing.
Okay. Well, we call that treatment or resistance to treatment. Okay. And so what we're saying is, along with that, can the Cowboys still win a game even without Zeke?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. We're saying even if your biggest beta weight is not there, that doesn't mean that another significant player can't steal the limelight. Can't all of a sudden just play their best and help influence that game. So what we're saying with treatment is sex offense behavior, if that is your outcome, everyone in this room, if that was our highest risk factor, if we were a client, that doesn't mean that we follow A, B, C. We don't do CBA to get to sex offense behavior. Jeff would probably look at, if I gave you an example, one of them is blaming your victim. So let's say one of the predictors, I'm just going to pull this out of thin air because...
And just to clarify, this is for the sex offense responsibility risk factor?
Yeah.
Yes. So let's say blaming your victim was the highest predictor of whether you owned your offense or not.
Okay.
And then the next one down... Do you have one, Thomas? I have no idea.
My victim lied about what I said because she's mad at me.
Perfect. Now, what's cool about what Thomas said is that maybe statically, maybe that could be a finding that all the textbooks say that leads to sex offense responsibility.
Okay.
But what Thomas and I are saying is when you're measuring people, when you're measuring behavior, there's a reason it's a soft science because it's not cause and effect. It's correlational. Mm-hmm. So Thomas and I had to think differently. We had to say, how do you measure dynamically all the time? And I'm going to have Thomas actually bring up real findings from what you just asked.
Oh, okay.
So just so I'm following here, so Zeke Elliott, let's pair Zeke Elliott with sex offense responsibility. Let's say because
Zeke.
Well, no, I'm just for the analogy.
I know. Yeah.
So if I'm a therapist, right, I can say this guy can't be successful unless he's taking responsibility for a sexual offense. If I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, I'm saying, or the coach for that matter, we can't win a game without Zeke Elliott. What we're saying is, well, what if that's eliminated? What if that factor's eliminated? Zeke Elliott's eliminated because he got injured or something like that, and sex offense responsibility is eliminated because we've attempted to talk to this person for a month or two, and they're just not taking responsibility. You're saying that, of course, Dallas can still win games, but they have to target different players. And with treatment, we have to target different risk factors linked to that. So Jeff was asking earlier, and I'm going to try this, but I'm just saying, going back to what we were saying is maybe these kind of connections, and you call them chains, correct? Maybe these are, it says, well, look, targeting, if they are very resistant and in categorical denial from the jump, just don't target it. Maybe instead help that guy get a job. And I'm not saying that's exactly what it is, but for the theory here, your employment, for whatever reason, and there's reasons why we can kind of get into that eventually that's going to lead them to now taking accountability for their offense. And it doesn't have to happen right then before I start moving on, right? Is that?
Well, absolutely. Because, people are dynamic, right? So everything we do, nobody's the same. And everybody has different motivators, and that can change from time to time. As different events transpire in somebody's life, they're going to be motivated differently than they were before, right? Because we continue to change and adapt. And so the idea here is that we kind of map out the general thing based on these general assessments, and we kind of find out what's the major trend and patterns here when we look at this statistics with a large group of people. And then we can narrow in on the individual and see, what does this person need? Mm-hmm. For the football analogy, you lose your star player, you can still win the game, but you're going to have to adjust your team based on every team you play against, because they have different strengths and weaknesses. And so if you adjust your team appropriately, then you can counteract and beat them.
Right.
Even without that star.
Right.
And so that's the same idea here. So I actually have some actual chains that we had built.
Yeah.
So if we look at take full responsibility for sexual offense behavior as our primary outcome, that's what we want to do.
Right.
I have 3 chains that lead to this. So let me just run through and read them real quick. Our first one is provide appropriate disclosure of offending behavior and risk management strategies to appropriate individuals.
And that's not sex offense responsibility. That was sexual risk management. That's a completely different risk factor.
Completely different.
Right.
But the statistics are telling us that as that increases, as that behavior increases, so does taking responsibility.
Okay.
So put into plain English, if you can get the dude to open up and tell his big brother everything that happened, whatever magic could occur within the home or between these two brothers would maybe make him more likely to own his offense.
You're talking about like the government, Big Brother?
No,
but it doesn't.
Literally, Big Brother.
But it goes further back though, doesn't it?
It does. Let me. So then we look at what influences the person and makes them want to provide appropriate disclosing information.
Yeah.
And so the next one down here is regularly attend meetings with their probation, parole officer, or attend tentative and participate in supervising meetings.
So are they
It's a small
attending
text.
meetings with their probation officer and having a good conversation with their PO?
Yes, exactly. So what we can see here is we're starting to see a trend here: honesty.
Yeah.
So as they're honest with their probation officer and with themselves, it all kind of hangs together.
How
we can
cool that is.
You know what? Yeah.
Because that's the probation officer sentence that Thomas just read is based off another risk factor called cooperation with community supervision. So kind of I don't want to use the term underhanded because we're not being manipulative here, but sort of, I guess, in a backdoor way to address sex offense responsibility is through these chains of events down the ways a little bit. And if you can get the dude to own up to things a little more with his probation officer, to talk with his PO, maybe not look at the PO as necessarily an adversary, and just get them to go to the meetings, talk to the PO, open up. The statistics bear out that will eventually, through a series of events, help the client be more likely to take responsibility for their offense.
So when we say meetings, like someone has no idea what we're talking about. What do we mean by meetings?
So if they have so essentially, like, this is what I tell clients all the time, and this might be an intervention for a therapist to put into place, is these actionable chains. What we're saying is if you teach a client, and I try to tell them all the time, like, look, you don't have to like your PO. You do have to acknowledge that person's a significant influence in your life right now and can make decisions that can impact you greatly. So you need to attend to that relationship. I mean, relationships that are toxic, yeah, throw them to the wayside. This is not one of them. So even if you don't like them, I need to attend to that relationship. And that's essentially what we're talking about there. I'm going to go there. I'm going to participate. I'm going to tell them about my life. And the crazy thing is that will then lead to a person disclosing stuff about their offense to trusted confidants in their life, family members or whatnot. And then that will lead to having more ownership individually with a therapist over their sex offense responsibility. So the meetings with their PO, they got to go to monthly meetings to check in, which is typically a 5-minute meeting. And the reason why is because the client doesn't dictate it to be more than a 5-minute meeting. The PO says, hey, you going to treatment? The client says, yeah. How are things going? Everything's fine. Okay. They update some stuff and he bounces, right? Now, I'm not knocking the POs. POs have a huge caseload sometimes. And if the client's not talking, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? They got to check but we're saying in this, it's in your best interest to stretch that to 15 or 20 by starting up a conversation with this person and kind of going more elaborate into, yeah, I was at group and we talked about this and I really like this part of this. And yeah, things are kind of tough, it's holidays and bills and stuff, like just talking about generalized stuff. Like that's what that's saying is you talk about that stuff, you're going to be much more likely to disclose to close family members. You're going to be much more likely to take sex offense responsibility.
Own up to your actions.
Which is crazy. Like, I mean, that's witchcraft right there.
It's awesome.
Well, let's take it one more deep. The next one down the chain is as this behavior decreases, the others increase as we go up the chain. So believe they deserve to get what they want regardless of what it costs someone else.
So that's criminal attitudes.
So
right?
if a client is saying, so read that one more time for me, Thomas, please.
So they believe they deserve to get what they want regardless of what it costs someone else.
Okay, good. So we have a pretty self-centered type attitude that's going to, like if a person were to act on that, then they'd be kind of doing some criminal stuff, right? So you said that this is kind of the inverse to be true, right? So, I'll explain it, but I could probably butcher it. So will you?
Sure. So as this behavior goes down, so the less likely a person is to believe that they deserve to get what they want, regardless of what it costs someone else. The less likely they are to think that, the more likely they are to attend the meetings that they're supposed to. The more likely that they are, as that goes down the chain, to also disclose their behavior to others, the more likely they are to take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
And it all makes sense as we look at the links in the chain here.
Well, I
which
think
is wonderful because it's intuitive as we read the list.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that statistics brought us here.
Right.
We didn't look at these before the numbers told us to look at them.
Right. You know, the interesting thing about that, it does, so as you say it like that, of course it makes sense. But the problem is, though, is it's like this with the clients, there's assumptions that are made about the clients that there weren't problems with the way they think about things to begin with. And I always like the example of empathy. And I've talked about empathy, and that's another total podcast. But, you know, empathy is a very neutral concept. Empathy is not good or bad. It's just empathy is neutral in that I'm just appreciating where the other person's coming from, right? Well, my question is, well, what if you don't give a shit about the other person, right? So most of the time we're teaching empathy plus compassion. We're counting on them to care about the other person. If I don't care about the other person and I can understand what they're feeling and thinking, I can manipulate them in a very harmful way, right? So we assume that clients carry compassion with them. We assume that a client doesn't think that way. And how we translate that into this is that, okay, then if he's denying a sex offense, then he's just being defiant. He's just being resistant. When really the criminal thinking, like helping that guy question, like, I should get whatever I want no matter what it costs anybody else. If I target that, which is definitely a personality thing, an attitude and orientation thing that it needs to be addressed, just taking it for granted that, you know, he doesn't think that way because we don't think that way, that's where we're failing the clients a lot of the times. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it makes sense as you're talking about it, but again, I don't think it's looked like that. I think that a client comes in, no, I didn't do it. It's looked at, man, that's total defiance. He's just not taking treatment seriously. Get him out of here. And that's really unfortunate, I think. And
that's one of the benefits to bringing statistics into the treatment, because it's so subjective. You know, it's all opinion based. You know, my life has told me that this type of behavior in this type of individual probably means this. Well, that's my opinion. Somebody else is going to have a different opinion. It's going to be a different, you know, so it's completely subjective. And so the way I decide to treat that person, it's just some random thing that I pull out of my binder, something that I learned, something that I remember, whatever. But it's not directed, right?
Right.
And so all of us in this room could decide to treat the same individual in a different way.
Right.
We might focus on a different avenue. But if we use statistics, it can tell us exactly what this person needs.
Yeah, and as a therapist, I think sometimes people get uncomfortable with that, though. I mean, because, I mean, when you reach the pinnacle of being a therapist, it's kind of like, well, I'm a therapist now. I got to make these decisions. And they throw out that stat that they say, you know, it's about as good as flipping a coin, which to me just means 50%. Right?
Clinical judgment you're referring to.
Yeah, clinical judgment. So I don't know if there's any. I don't know I don't know what research it is. I've heard that multiple times, that clinical judgment is about as good as flipping a coin. In other words, 50% of the time, clinicians get it wrong. And I think the normal thing to do that is to push back. But really, I'm kind of like, well, man, I don't want to be one of those guys. Like, is there any way to fix that? Is there any way to improve it? Because just real quick, I just want to, these risk assessments, I mean, when we score them, just to give you guys an idea, these 1 through 16, we score them on a 0 to 3 basis. And these are the therapists who score them. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, minimal or no need, some need, considerable need, very considerable need for improvement on all these things. And then that comes out with a number. And so 0 through 10 is low risk. 11 through 20 is moderate risk, and 21 and above is high risk. And we use this as benchmarks for progress in treatment and discharge. So one of the rules we have is that clients need to be at low risk for 90 consecutive days prior to discharge. It just makes sense. They're low risk behaviors, and then we can discharge them. And most of our clients come in high risk. But I always felt like that wasn't enough. Like, I mean, I even felt like I'm scoring high on these things, and am I targeting the wrong things? And this is where you and I had a discussion about this. I'm talking to Zach now about, can we fix this? And you came up with, I mean, this is where it started. Like, I mean, what did you come up with on that?
Absolutely. And to be honest, just to rehearse back to literature, a lot of this idea comes from behavioral economics. Okay. And the process that we began when we first started this was a 3-phase process. The first being normative, which is the qualitative. And to help you understand what qualitative means, it's using words and narratives as evidence. And that's what therapy is, in essence. You know, I get to see their subjective feelings, their perception, and see how they perceive reality. So we take that into account. Well, then the second process to help solidify the subjective is the prediction. It's the backing up those assertions, those opinions with empirical evidence. And that's where the stats comes in, because we're saying, okay, if this is what Jeff's getting from his client, and this is what Mace is getting from his client, and Justin, and so forth, but is that generalizable? Well, let's look at research methodology. For qualitative statistics, meaning you're using words as evidence, it's suggested to use 3. So if this comes up 3 times, if Justin's client says it, Mace's client says, Jeff's client says it, it doesn't make it generalizable, but it creates a theme, meaning we pay attention to it. And a lot of people get that wrong. They go, oh, if they're all saying it, it must be true to everyone else. No. That's why qualitative stops there. It's not meant to be generalizable. So what we decided when we were talking, how do we make this more generalizable, meaning what we're finding actually exists in nature, not due to chance. And that's what scientific inquiry does. And then the third process, when you mix those two, the qual and the quant, so the words with the numbers, then you get the prescription. You can prescribe more thoroughly, more accurately, more effectively, and more efficiently.
So explain what the outcome measure does, because we've talked about risk assessment, and we talked about risk factors and what they are. Explain, because originally I came up with I was thinking, oh yeah, what we should do is make a statement and the client says yes or no. It was some dumb shit. Like, I'm very juvenile when I think about this. And then I told you, and you're like, yeah, Mace, that's a great idea. You're a retard. So, I mean, no, we're all therapists here. So you're using the clinical retarded term.
No.
Don't be commenting on that. I mean, yeah.
That was Mace Warren.
Yeah. I donate to the Paralympics every year.
Okay? Let me answer in regards to that. Yeah. So what Thomas and I are saying is the fact you wanted a yes or no answer, we call that dichotomous outcome.
Correct.
There is a time and place. The thing with what people need to understand is that when you're trying to find an answer to a question, you need to apply the right statistic for that question. If you want a dichotomous outcome, yes or no, it wouldn't be stupid to do it if you want to know what the likelihood of someone doing that risk factor is. But what we do in the assessment is not likelihood. So that's when we decided to suggest doing a more continuous. You decided to
because you're way more smart.
No, it's a team effort.
In that you said, hey, let's do this. And I said, yeah, that sounds great. If that's a team.
He said big numbers.
But yeah, no, I mean, so continuous means that it can be broken down into fractional amounts. So decimals make sense. If you're doing categories, you can't break it down into fractional amounts. That's why they call it discrete in statistics. If we can make a measure, those risk factors, more continuous, we can be more accurate in our estimations. So what we've done is we changed it from a yes and no, 0 to 1, to a 0 to 10, which then can be interpreted to percentile.
On a strongly agree to strongly disagree scale.
Yes, correct? Absolutely.
Okay. So in other words, if I'm an offender taking this, I read a statement that says, I blame the victim for my conviction. It's not a yes or a no. I can kind of agree with that, or I can kind of not agree with that, right? And I always think about a client who I'm working with who said, well, no, of course I was responsible, and I was the adult, and I should have done a better job vetting my sexual partner, because really I didn't know who I was having sex with. She lied about her age, though. So, there's two sides to this really slim pancake here, and I'm just saying that she lied, and I wouldn't have done, and I'm telling you the truth, Mace, I would not have done that if she told me she was 16, but she looked 18. And it is my fault for not checking that, but I'm telling you the honest truth there.
That makes it really tough to do a yes or no.
Yeah, that's not a yes or no answer. So this continuous answer is much better way, and more, and you're saying more accurate way of measuring that, right? Yeah. I mean, so what we did was we took these risk factors, which have been researched by all the developers of the SOTIPS risk assessment. They've been researched. They've been validated. This has been approved through a company, an organization called ATSA, and that they've said this is a validated risk assessment instrument. We took those risk factors that have already been proven, and then what we essentially did was add statements that are consistent with those, right? And then the offender then agrees or disagrees with each of these 16 different risk factors. And there's a total of how many items on there? 80 something?
So there's 88. 8 are static, and then 80 are the dynamic risk factors you're speaking of.
Okay. And then and based off of those, then we have, they complete that. So folks, every 90 days, the offender then is the one who puts this. So this is not scored by the clinician. This is scored by the offender. They read the statement, they rate it, and then that goes into some mechanism in a satellite, or something, right? And then it tells us through their initial thing what we should target based on other things. And you said based on how other people are answering too, so every time people answer, it gets stronger and more accurate, right? Explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's
simple terms.
Okay. Yes, I apologize.
Yeah, you're good. I mean, I'm just normal people listen to this.
You're right.
I'm semi-intelligent. Normal people listen to this and be like, "What the?" Yeah.
No. Okay. So what you're talking about is something that why we say statistics is so important, especially because there's two types, again, descriptive and predictive. What Thomas and I are saying is we need to get more in the realm of predictive. And there's two things we're looking for that you just talked about, validity and reliability. That's why we have scales. And that's why when you're reading those 16 risk factors, the idea behind it is, all right, Zach, keep it simple. When you step on a scale that measures weight, so, and be nice, if I were to step on a scale and it said 300 pounds, and I step back off, and then I step back on it, it says 300 pounds, would you say that's a reliable scale?
Yes.
Why?
Well, not by looking at you, but
Well, that's what we're getting next.
Because it was the measurement was repeated, and he came out with the same result.
yeah, both times it had the same exact.
Okay, so I can rely on that number to come every time I step on that scale.
Correct.
Now, that does not mean it's a valid scale.
So if I eyeball you, you look like 175.
Right.
Right.
So we need both of those to line up.
180.
Damn it.
He looked at my love handles.
Yeah.
So. Adds another 5 pounds.
It's holidays, bro. He got an excuse.
2.5 per side. So hey, that's actually alpha score. Anyways, no, never mind. That's more advanced for another podcast. So you need both of those. And so when in our measurements, what Thomas is bringing up is we are very cautious in how we proceed to measure reliability and validity. We not only double check, we triple check. So that's the thing is I want to make sure that what the client's saying is not only reliable, but valid, because we're then going to compare them on a large scale. And there's something called statistical power. Okay. Yeah. That's what we base all this off of. And guess what? Statistical power can easily be explained by a puzzle. So let's imagine you're doing a 1,000-piece puzzle and you only have 100 pieces.
Well, the puzzle can look like shit.
Well, this is where we get into trouble in science, because Justin might say, that looks like a polar bear. Mace might say, I don't know, looks like a ghost. When you put more pieces to the puzzle, guess what? It's snow.
Oh,
That's research.
I thought you were going to be like a porn scene.
But yeah, that's what you're talking about is the reliability and validity. That's what we base a lot of this off of, because if those things don't line up, how do we know what we're saying is actually relevant?
Yeah.
Great.
So every time I step on the scale, it's 180. That matches up with what actually is the case, and then also it's going to hit 180 every single time.
And that's why stats is so tricky. You
Yeah.
need to make sure you check all your bases, because you don't want to make a type 1 error. And a type 1 error is the worst error you can make in science. It says that something exists.
Like, what happens if you do is there like stats bullies who come and like just
Like
beat
type 1 diabetes.
It's worse. It's worse.
It's type 1 AIDS. Like, yeah, there's stats bullies who come beat the shit out
Okay,
of you.
no.
Type 1.
You've heard of a type 1 compression therapy. Have you heard of that?
Always. No.
Well, I don't know what type 1 means, man.
But compression therapy. Have you ever heard of that, where they used to for
Where they
delinquent?
hold you.
There you go.
Yeah.
You remember that, Justin? Come on, help me out
You
here.
remember it? Like,
Help
he's
me out
been
here.
through it.
Yeah, like Justin had a client.
So, man, those are the good old days.
Does anyone know the premise behind that?
I
though?
just rocked my 8 o'clock to sleep.
Okay. Back in the day, they used to with the.
Is this like the thunder jacket for a dog?
Yes. No.
Oh, shit.
No.
Yeah, it is kinda
No.
right.
I'm explaining what a type 1 error is in the most simplistic form I can.
No, you got it. Yeah. Good. No, I'm following. So they squoze people in back in the day.
I guarantee when I start talking about it, you'll be like, "Oh yeah."
Talking about it like an Indian burn.
No. It was
no, doggy pile, bro.
no.
Okay.
With Defiant Youth, some
Chinese
smart
finger
therapists thought it was awesome to basically, let's have that child gain empathy by knowing what the mother went through with the birth. You know where I'm going with this? Come on.
Yeah, I get it.
Then what happened?
Thank
Yeah.
you, science.
What happened?
Nothing good.
Nothing good.
No,
Creepy.
what happened was
Y'all.
the success they did find was after we did this rebirthing process where we basically just like,
Rebirth?
where they put them in mattresses and squoze them for hours on end.
No.
And
Wait,
seriously,
did those mattresses were they all like wet and smelly?
No, it's a Tempur-Pedic.
maybe.
It's a Tempur-Pedic. Dude. It's comfortable.
Oh, man.
Oh shoot!
Smelly mattress therapy.
Well,
You're rebirthing.
Yeah.
What the hell? Anyway,
Good question. Good question.
Okay.
Good question.
Yeah,
so,
so-
what,
head
so
hurts
what
now.
happened?
so the idea is like,
What the shit?
the idea is, the success was, my child was so good after that. They never ever talked back to me, or
Yeah,
they
they
never
didn't want to go through that again.
Oh yeah, they got tortured.
Right.
Oh, good, man.
So the type 1 error was this technique is statistically significant. It works. Your child will be cured. The problem is people start dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
'cause-
wait, so what is a type? So I get the
Yeah,
example, but
right.
so what is the actual definition of a type 1 error then?
A type 1 error is when you say something exists in nature when it does not.
Okay.
Okay, so as it applies
Bigfoot.
to now, this is so. Let me, if I'm following you correctly,
not.
the last one that came out with this was and we cite this in our presentations in 2014. The Bureau of Planning or Justice and Planning or something like that. I'm butchering that, but we talked about this stat, and in Utah. We actually have really good recidivism rates when it comes to sex offenders leaving. So they tracked 807 sex offenders.
By good, you mean low.
Yeah, low recidivism rates. Well, so out of the 807 sex offenders, only 7 of those in a 3-year follow-up committed a new sexual offense. So that's 0.87% of those offenders committed a new sexual
Extremely
offense. 12% of those committed a new crime, non-sexually related. But so you could look at that right there and say we are super successful. Like if you look at the success rates in substance use, we're about like 30% successful nationwide, which is awful. And if you looked at those numbers and you said, okay, if we're trying to prevent future sexual offenses, well, less than 1%, 0.875%. We're 99% effective. But the type 1 error is 45% of those dudes are going back to prison on technical violations because their life sucks. And because their life isn't going well and they make poor decisions in the meantime, and maybe we're kicking them out of therapy because they're in denial of their offense. And so we kick them out and then they go back to prison. That's our type 1 error. Is that accurate? Kinda.
Swing and a miss.
Well, no. I mean, here's the thing. That could be type 2. That's the other part of it.
Oh, I hate type 2.
Hey, what about let me try to take a stab at type 1. I'm venturing into the flat Earth realm. Though,
No.
right?
Oh,
I was watching this video.
Don't do it.
I was watching this video, and this dude, he
You're not a flat earther, are you, Thomas?
Oh, all the way.
so he had like a plate, just like a dinner plate, and he poured water into the dinner plate, and he said, "Look, the water is flat." And he used that, he said the water doesn't curve, the water lays flat. It's just like in the ocean when you're out on in a boat, you look at the water, if the water is flat, it's not curving. Is that a type 1 error? It says, since the water in this dinner plate is flat.
I'm going to throw up.
Since the water in this dinner plate is flat, that's proof the earth is also flat. Would that be a type 1 error? Yeah.
Well, so the type 1 is where you say, I've done all this research, and the research tells me that this is happening. But if your research is faulty and that's not actually happening, that's the type 1 error. And so I might publish a bunch of papers and try to convince people that, hey, this is the new cure to cancer, for example, or all of a sudden I know why this happens.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong, but I'm making this claim as if it's true, but I'm wrong, that's a type 1 error.
So like when Mace takes his shirt off during an individual therapy session and flexes for his clients, and he thinks that's the reason that they're having success, and he goes out and he markets that and says, this is abdominal six-pack therapy, sign up for a low price of whatever, that would be type 1.
That's a type 1.
Okay.
And the type 2 is the puzzle where he says, I think it looks like a polar bear.
Yeah, all right.
And he says, I think it looks like a ghost.
And it's snow.
So
it's actually snow. That's a type 2 error. It's an error. He wasn't right, but it wasn't like an empirical claim.
So in sex offender treatment, the type 1 error is, look, we're really confrontational with these dudes, and we don't take no shit from them. And if they say the wrong words, they're out and they're going back to prison. And guess what? We've got less than 1% recidivism rates, and that's why we're right.
Absolutely. So that would be the type 1.
Right. But again, I mean, if the idea is I want them to be successful overall, I want them to be rehabilitated, come back to the community, and be contributing member to society. Now, if we're 45% along with 12% along with 1%, so now we're what's that, like 57%? So we're less than half effective in what we actually thought we were, because dudes are going back to prison.
And if you're not taking into account that they're in jail, so really what they should be doing is saying, well, let's just look at the people that are not currently locked up.
Correct.
After X amount of time.
Yeah.
That would be a more reliable measure of what we're trying to
But people don't like to do that
at.
because it looks nicer if we have a lower statistical number.
Sure, yeah.
Claim that we're successful.
Put your entire caseload in prison and you're 100% effective in reducing sexual recidivism.
Well, and there's
which isn't.
This is it's called I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. It's called a fallacy of authority. So I'm not saying, like, the thing that we're trying to say that I really like that you guys do, because we do this and then we pair it with interventions that we know to be effective. But the thing is like I've argued with Jeff for a while about doing introduction groups. Get clients in, we all sit around, and everybody discloses their offense. And the research would bear out that that's just not a good idea to do that, right? Well, here's the thing. Jeff does those really well, right? Jeff does them really well. But I can't replicate Jeff. So the fallacy of authority is, and this is where therapists fall into problems, they feel like because they've done it this way so many times and they're really good at it, because I know some therapists that are dynamite at doing therapy in a confrontational way without demolishing the relationship with the client. But the fallacy of authority says, well, because Jeff can do good introduction groups, everybody should be doing introduction groups. But I can't replicate Jeff's method, and I'm not Jeff, and I don't have, and so if I'm just a budding therapist that doesn't know his method or anything, I'm going to be confrontational and have a group, and it's not going to go well. And that's where we're running into problems too. And that's the type 2 error, is like, this is the thing we should do because I did it and I'm successful. Well, I'm glad that you're successful in doing that method, but I can't replicate you as a person. So can we do this in a way that we have, evidence-based interventions that address those things in a very, evidence-based way to treat that dynamic risk factor, right? I mean,
well, how about finding out what the client needs specifically, and then allowing the therapist to treat it in any way that works for them. Mm-hmm. So whatever strong suit that anybody has,
The funny thing is, and you're not a therapist, right, Thomas?
He's gonna be.
Yeah. So like the thing you just said right there about letting the client kind of guide things and tell us what their strengths are, that's like 101, what we're taught as therapists right out the gate, right getting into it. It's strength-based, client-guided, client-centered treatment. So that, I don't know, I just thought that was interesting that you said it, having not even been a part of this field before.
Yeah.
It's great.
I mean, and that's the reason that you give the assessment in the first place, right? Find out, what does this person need?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing about the statistics, is because we can look at, what does this population need?
Yeah. Well, the only way I think to address that, and I think this isn't something I want to open up now, but Zach said this earlier, you're dynamically measuring dynamic risk. I mean, if you can, as a therapist, if you understand that, and Jeff had referenced this is risk that changes over time, we're dynamically measuring the ones that actually matter to work on. And again, it's not that the other ones don't matter. We'll get there.
So you're measuring something that's moving.
Well, we'll get to sex offense responsibility. We're just saying the method at which you get there is going to look different. And eventually, everybody's going to get to that point.
Can I give you another example? So
Please.
I've got another chain. So we read down one chain earlier all the way through. Let's give you a second chain, which statistically has showed us that will influence taking full responsibility for sexual offense behavior. This one's a little bit darker in just the nature of it.
Like DC dark? Like shoes? DC?
You've been holding on to that. Come back, make this about comic books again.
So this one says that as this behavior decreases, the likelihood of taking responsibility for sexual offense behavior increases, and that is regularly having sexual thoughts of forcing someone to have sex.
Okay, so if I'm having fantasies about raping somebody, as that decreases over time, I'm going to take more responsibility for my offense.
That's right.
Wow. And then what's the other chain? So let's take that a step back.
So taking that a step back is believing children can make up their own minds about having sex, and sex with children is not harmful.
So if I have in my mind that a kid who's 15 years old, that they can decide for themselves when that having sex with an adult is okay, like addressing that would reduce a person's likelihood of having rape fantasies, which would increase their likelihood of being responsible for their sexual offense.
Correct.
And take that another step back.
Another step, believe they deserve to get what they want regardless of what it costs someone else.
Jesus, dude.
There's that criminal attitude in there, man.
So it almost always, it's so crazy how it starts getting down to some pretty basic stuff and the funny thing is people would really appreciate that if you just said, look, you should focus on helping a person understand that that's just not an effective way to live, and not focusing on this. I mean, think how terrified therapists are when they hear about a rape fantasy and they're like, oh, let's do some fantasy logs, which what are you logging it? What does that have to do?
Those I've never really gotten any mileage out of doing a fantasy log. So instead, as many as I've done with clients.
Right. So instead, if you're saying, I wouldn't even talk about it, we're talking about this to do then, and this is what I was kind of referencing earlier. The only way I think to address that is to have a dynamic curriculum along with this, because one of the faults of sex offender treatment is there's a ton of workbooks out there. Like if any of you went on to Safer Society Press or Neary Press or something like that, you could buy any workbook you wanted for these guys. There's a Good Lives model, there's a Pathways, there's a Footprints, all these things, but they're very linear progression. And I do step 1 to step 2, and I go to step 2 to step 3. Well, what if I'm on step 10 for that day? For that day or that month, I need to focus on this more than anything. And some therapists will never get there because they're just so focused on step 1, which is really unfortunate, I think. That just doesn't do any good for the client. It's kind of amazing where this thing is. I'm really fascinated by that. It's just, and plus nobody's ever developed anything for sex offenders.
It keeps challenging everything I thought I knew about my job, which simultaneously freaks me out and makes me happy. Freaks me out because all these suppositions that I've held to be true is like the gold standard of sex offender therapy, and I have worked countless clients through these programs, it's kind of getting turned on its head in some ways. But at the same time, you know, like I want to be on the cutting edge of things. I want to be sharp, you know, and specifically a minute ago, you referenced that, you know, I do these disclosure groups or these, you know, where they disclose their offense during therapy. And I appreciate the compliment, but I have long since given those up because I don't think that I'm better than on the evidence. You know, I'd like to think I am, but that's just me puffing my ego. I go with what works. And
well, you're better. It
might have taken you 3 years to talk me into it, but it did. So this perpetually has me outside my comfort zone. And I love it. It's neat stuff.
Well, I mean, as far as this goes, we're obviously going to have you guys back to talk about this. I mean, we'll wrap this up, but the thing I look at this is, and I say, I think part of being a good therapist is exercising humility. Like Zach had referenced this earlier. This is a very soft science, and soft. I mean, so if there's a new development like this, I mean, you should be jazzed about it. You should be jazzed and excited that now we found a new way to do this that's more effective than before. Adding more legitimacy to what you're doing is way better than just doing business as usual. I mean, it's kind of like where you're trying to, you mentioned flat earthers, and anybody who, if you believe in that, dude, I cannot convince you otherwise. Like, no matter what I say, like, even if I said, I mean, you guys are math geniuses, right? If I told you, 238,900 is more than 7,500. Is that right? That's right, right? Okay. That number's bigger than the other one.
I can't see you guys nodding, for hell's sake.
We're sharing one microphone. It's kind of difficult.
So 238,900 is a bigger number than 7,500, right?
Uh-huh.
So I say, well, the moon is 238,900 miles away from the Earth. And if I use a telescope or just look up into the air, can I see the moon?
Yeah.
Of course. Well, Mount Everest is only 7,500 miles away. Can you see that, bitch? Is what I want to ask. You see that with a telescope right now? Can you look out the window and see Mount Everest? If the Earth is flat,
it's because of pollution.
If the Earth is flat, dude, then you tell me. Can you?
It's the inversion.
Hey, that's
the inversion, dude.
Oh, well, yeah.
Wait till March, then.
Well,
I'll
no,
be able to see it.
they're just going to say, no, man, who made that telescope?
Well, you see, the ice wall actually refracts the light where you can't see Everest.
Made that telescope, bro, and that's why you can't see it.
Have you been to Mount Everest? How do you know it's actually there?
What is Mount Everest?
The government made Mount Everest.
The government made Mount Everest, bro. It doesn't exist. It's
round Earth shield.
Doesn't make sense.
Okay. Well, hey, you guys have been great. I will have to bring you back again. I really appreciate you guys taking time tonight. So,
thanks
it's been
for
good
having
to have
us.
you.
It's been great.
Zach Bullock, Thomas Miller.
Yeah, thanks for
you
having
guys are studs, man. Appreciate you.
Alrighty, folks, that does it for episode 14 of the Guerrilla Social Work Podcast. We want to thank you for tuning in. We also want to thank Zach and Thomas for being so kind as to join us and explain many things that we would not be able to explain ourselves. Hope you enjoyed that one. Tune in for the next one. We have Jamie from University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. We went out there back in May to get a training from this fine group on a cognitive behavioral intervention-based therapy manual that they have for group curriculums, specifically working with sex offenders. So we went out there, spent a week out there, drove some people crazy with our nonstop silliness and training, but needless to say, it was amazing. We got a lot out of it. We've actually implemented this here for a while, and she came out to do some fidelity checks, kind of sitting in, giving us feedback on what's working and what we can do better on. So she was also kind enough to stop and join us for an episode of the podcast. So we end up having a really, really fun discussion on that one. So tune in on the next one. Otherwise, we will talk to you later.